artificial intelligence, including his views on warnings that could challenge humanity itself. Now, we are trying to go deep and go to the source around here, and we will be doing that when Mr. Bill Gates joins us. That's in just a few minutes. Now, that's something of a global story. Our top story right here in the U.S. picks up on the anti-democracy admissions we've been hearing from Trump aides. They argue now that their day job is to steal elections. Two Trump RICO defendants make that argument. Mark Meadows, facing long odds after losing a federal judge's ruling, now pushing what is a long shot appeal that would basically require a more senior judge to overrule his loss and agree with his claim that this is actually, quote, an impossibility to draw a bright line distinction between a chief of staff engaging in official and political activity. Let's put this in full. I want people to see this. A distinction that just basically says, if you did that, right, if you make this thing where you say you're engaging in official political activity, then his role would cease to function. It's a distinction that would mean you wouldn't have the position. It would cease to function altogether. And you take in that argument, you can see Meadows is trying to basically move the goalposts on this case. He was indicted for a RICO coup, but he wants to redefine whatever that alleged evidence of coup activity is as just political activity. Now that is a reach because judges deal with government cases all the time. They know White House aides do intersect with some politics, so there are rules on that. But that goal and dealing with that is a long ways from a goalpost of, say, racketeering or stealing an election in a whole other state. And you can notice this rather outlandish claim that any actions to steal the Georgia votes were actually legitimate political activity, part of the job of the chief of staff, continues a shift or a creep that was originally viewed as quite extreme when we heard this, even extreme by many Republicans, because while many top Republicans, including, say, McConnell, Graham, were completely condemning the insurrection, there were on the night of January 6th, on the days right after, we then saw the creep. We saw RNC, their officials, basically proclaiming January 6th was actually legitimate political discourse. Now, peaceful protest is allowed, but storming the Capitol is a crime, and violently doing so while overthrowing the government is sedition. It's now convicted sedition. So the RNC was pushing it out as kind of a civic argument, a shifting of goalposts, as I said, that relates to those legal claims. So what was once this sort of extreme, almost galling or embarrassing attempt to say that that was a legitimate discourse to move those goalposts, now we see it in these actual court cases. Trump aides also trying to move the goalposts to stay out of jail. And Meadows has company with the Trump DOJ vet Jeffrey Clark, indicted in Georgia. He's under scrutiny by his own former DOJ colleagues, while publicly claiming the problem nowadays is the poor treatment for people involved in January 6th.
One of the original sins of government that has carried and caused the poor treatment of the January 6th protester defendants is the lawless formation of the House Select Committee, the January 6th Committee.
Clark has begun voicing these concerns about treatment after he was searched himself. That's the footage of that. Then he got indicted. He's echoing what Meadows has said by arguing whatever he did was ratified by Trump as part of the job responsibilities for Clark, which, quote, included election-related issues. That's how he puts it. Now, the question for the judge here is narrow. If Clark actions related to things that he wrote and did inside DOJ, that is somehow central and that it's debatable what he did, then should that be better handled by a federal court? Are those alleged activities, like this infamous letter he tried to use to abuse power and pressure Georgia, would that somehow be more blurred with his actual, say, non-coup job activities than the same claim for Mr. Meadows, who of course lost? That's a legal question. The broader issue is what we're seeing in this combination here. As I mentioned, the goalposts, a very understandable thing, kind of well-worn political cliche, but underneath that is this deeper question of how we went from Mitch McConnell decrying an insurrection and the whole Republican Party initially claiming, outside of a few MAGA hardcores, that this was a bad thing, to now both in public life, the RNC, and in these new filings in court, very serious people who are currently part of the effort to regain power for Trump and their colleagues, quite literally saying out loud or even under oath, this is all just part of their jobs. This is part of running the federal government. This is part of what they call legitimate political activities, be that by the citizenry discourse or by the government officials. Is there something wrong with this picture? And sometimes we ask the big questions around here, and other times we ask questions that you can't even believe we're asking. Is trying to get a sovereign state election and its officials to steal or overthrow the vote, is that part of job duties at DOJ? When we turn to someone who knows something about this, both for working at DOJ and arguing a lot of court cases, former acting Solicitor General Neil Katyal. Welcome back. I put that question to you.
Yeah, there's no world in which overthrowing an election is part of your job duties. Look, I worked at the Justice Department twice. Everyone at the Justice Department knows there's a strict prohibition against employees engaging in political activity as part of their job. So leave aside engage in coup. Just, the claim that Meadows made today is, well, there's no way to have a line between politics and the regular work of a government official, and that's just totally wrong. There is no Donald Trump exception to the Hatch Act, which is the act that forbids political activity by people in the Justice Department. And with respect to Meadows, I think the most important thing, this is why he lost his removal motion. The judge in a 49-page opinion said the Constitution cuts out the executive branch from one thing, which is presidential elections, for the most important of reasons. Otherwise, you'd use your power as an incumbent to install yourself and keep yourself in power. That's why the founders did it. That's, of course, exactly what Donald Trump tried to do with Meadows, with Clark, and the like. And to me, the most significant point of all these court actions on removals over the last 48 hours is you're seeing already the conflict between Trump and his aides, like Meadows and Clark. Like Clark is basically saying in his filing, Trump told me to do this, and he's blaming Trump. And these kinds of conflicts are only going to increase over time.
Do you think that there is a kind of the larger creep I mentioned, the things that, again, very recently, even after 4 years of Trump, were seen as extreme or out of bounds, are being laundered? And is that A, a concern for us as a society, and B, could that affect how these cases are litigated?
It's 100% a concern for society. I mean, they're trying to normalize something that I would have just thought was the most obvious thing for all Americans. That if you lose an election, you lost the election, you don't go and try and call out people for violence, and you don't try and justify it afterwards the way, Jeffrey Clark did in that testimony. When he said, well, the real problem here is the lawless action of the January 6th committee. I mean, look, I'll grant you, Jeff Clark knows lawless. He's probably an expert at it. But there's nothing improper about what the January 6th committee did. They just simply investigated and found this guy way out of his lane. And that's why even Trump appointees in the Justice Department, like Richard Donahoe, told the president, if you make this guy the acting Attorney General of the United States, I'm resigning right away.
So on the DOJ portion, a place where, again, as I mentioned, you worked, does he have any better claim than Meadows? And is there any downside or concern if, as he and his lawyer claim, Clark, that gosh, well, any lawyer ever at the DOJ writing something now has to worry that not only could they get in trouble, but they could get in trouble outside of the federal courts?
I mean, look, if you're a Justice Department lawyer, Ari, and you write a memo to launch a coup and justify it, yeah, you got something to worry about. I certainly don't think any of the 85,000 or whatever women and men at the Justice Department are doing those kinds of things. So I think they're absolutely fine. They have been fine over time. There's a way in which Clark's claim is better than Meadows and a claim in which it's worse. The way in which it's better is that he's not working in the executive branch directly at the White House. He's working outside of it at the Justice Department. And you could view like the founders cutting out they cut out the president, people who work directly for the president because of their worry about incumbency. And maybe you can say that doesn't extend to the Justice Department. But the Justice Department, of which Jeffrey Clark was a part, has a very strict prohibition against political activity for the most obvious of reasons. And that's what this guy was doing. Either way, there's no, viable, strong argument for this case to be in federal court, which is why Meadows lost, which is why Jeff Clark will lose, almost certainly.
Yeah. Really striking, interesting stuff. Neil Kochel, thank you. I want to remind everyone you can go to msnbc.com.